In our discussion in Indian Constitution and Polity, I would like to take up in the introductory chapter the Indian Constitution and its features. I mean, clearly mentioned in the syllabus that the features of the Indian Constitution. So, in that context, in that broad chapter, I would like to first talk about the nature of the Indian Constitution. So, the first topic is the nature of the Indian Constitution. So, one of the features. So, when you say nature, we are actually talking about what is the most important highlight, or if you have to summarize in one phrase, how does it look like? That is the meaning of nature of the Indian Constitution. So, according to the architects of Indian Constitution, the experts, or rather what we call the constitution makers, the Indian Constitution, they described Indian Constitution as federal in nature. The constitution makers called Indian Constitution as federal, but many independent experts, they hesitate to characterize Indian Constitution as federal. They say, they agree that a constitution can be called as federal only if it replicates the American Constitution. Only if it replicates the American or the USA Constitution. For them, the independent expert, if it is not the replica of the American Constitution, we cannot call it as federal, but it is a variation of federal constitution. So, that is why many experts would like to call Indian Federation as quasi-federal constitution, semi-federal, quasi-federal, or a federation with unitary spirit. A federation with unitary spirit. So, that is what many experts would like to call India as. But our constitution makers, our forefathers of our constitution, or people like B.R. Ambedkar, they would like to call Indian Constitution as for the nature of Indian Constitution as federal. So, what do you mean by federation? A federation, it is a group of region or states under a central government or a federal government. So, it is in a federation is a group of units or states having some some self-governing power under a central government, a group of units under a central government. So, there is a dual form of government. A federation has dual form of government. That means two governments will be there. In fact, a central government and state governments. And that too, this division of power is based on the constitution. It is clearly defined in the constitution, and the states and the center both are independent authorities. So, dual form of government, two governments. See, in India we have the local self-government also, the panchayat, the municipality, but that is a different thing. That has been made through devolution of power. The center and the states, and from the states we have decided to give some power to the states. But when it comes to federation, it is not somebody given. It is agreed upon right from the beginning that states will have certain power, center will have certain power. So, there is a clear-cut division. So, in a federation, the government is divided into federal and the state governments. A federation is divided such a way that both are independent. In a federation, the center or the federal government and the state governments are independent, and they are coordinate authority. They are not only independent, they are coordinate authorities. Independent of each other. So, the makers of the constitution call India as federal, but the independent experts call Indian constitution as quasi-federal, the nature is quasi-federal. The constitution of USA, which is considered to be truly federal, or rather only the constitution of USA is considered to be truly federal and others are not considered even if there is some variation. And dual government or two governments is the crux of the federal system. Central government or the federal government and the units which we call it as the state governments. So, neither is subordinate to the other. One big feature of this system is neither is subordinate to the other, meaning the center is not subordinate to the states and the states are not subordinate to the center, but are coordinate authorities. Independent of each other. But are coordinate authorities independent of each other. So, it is not subordinate, the center is not subordinate to the states, states are not subordinate to the center and vice versa, and coordinate and independent within the sphere allotted to them. Coordinate authorities within the sphere allotted to them. Within the sphere allotted to them. Coordinate and independent within the sphere allotted to them. So, the existence of coordinate, one sentence if I have to say, once again, one line definition, the existence of coordinate authorities, the existence of coordinate authorities independent of each other is the gist of the federal principle. So, please don't confuse with the three-tier panchayat system, the third layer, that is devolution of power that has been devolved down from the states to the local self bodies. We are not talking about that. We are talking about dual. See, the opposite of a federal system may be a unitary system. Like Britain, there is only one central government, no state government. France, there is only one central government and no state governments. So, here we have a dual government, more than one, sharing of power. That is the key to federation. So, normally big countries, so I will talk about why a federation is required and where all we find federation, I will talk a bit later in another video, but please understand the existence of coordinate authorities independent of each other is the gist of the federal principle. Now, coming to the essential characteristics of a federal government. Now, in this context, so the question is, what is the nature of the Indian Constitution? The nature of the Indian Constitution is federal according to the constitution makers. Independent experts are not agreeing. Now, 5 essential characteristics of federation. 5 essential characteristics of federation. There are 5 essential characteristics, and in fact, all these 5 characteristics are there in India. But even then, Indian Constitution cannot be termed as federal, that is the other thing. So, what are the 5 essential characteristics? Number 1, it is the distribution of power. Distribution of power. See, there is a distribution of power between the central and the state governments, or the federal and the state governments. What all powers are there with the center, it is clearly defined. And it is given to the states also. See, for example, in Indian Constitution right now, what we call the union list, that is where it is allotted to the union or the center or the federal government. There are 99 items right now. Initially it was 97, 99 items are there with the union. Then they have state list. That means exclusively given to the states. That is 61 items. 61 types of, say for example, in the union list, defense, foreign affairs. So, it is exclusively with the union. Similarly, for the state list. And in India, we also have a list called concurrent list. We will be elaborately studying this. So, concurrent list is the list where both center and the states can legislate. They have some power. There are 52 items right now. So, there is a clear cut distribution of power between the center and the states. So, that is the first characteristics of the federation. Number 2, supremacy of the constitution. The second important highlight is the supremacy of the constitution. The constitution is supreme. Constitution is the supreme law of the land. Both the authorities, both central and the state governments draw its powers from the constitution. You cannot violate the constitution. Constitution is supreme. Whether it is central government or state government, you cannot bypass or you cannot overlook and you cannot circumvent the constitution. Constitution is whatever is written in the constitution, whatever is there in the constitution, it has to be taken with full seriousness. You cannot bypass it. So, supremacy of the constitution. Number 3, to maintain the supremacy, there has to be a written constitution. So, written constitution is a corollary or it is a side effect of the supremacy. If the constitution has to be supreme, it has to be written down properly to avoid any confusion or any doubt regarding the powers given by the constitution to the center and the states. So, the powers of the center and the states are decided and defined in the constitution, and that constitution is supreme, and to make it supreme, it is clearly written down, a written constitution. And a fourth very important component of our federal principle or a federation is the rigidity of the constitution. This rigidity word should not be understood in a different sense, or rather rigidity, normal rigidity. Normal rigidity is something is very rigid, difficult to change. But any written constitution is rigid. Please don't mistake it. Any written constitution, because the moment something is written, changing is not that easy. But that is not the meaning of rigidity in federal principle. In a federal principle, it means the power of amending the constitution. The most importantly, please understand, who can amend the constitution is where the rigidity comes into picture. The power of amending the constitution is, the power of amending the constitution is vested, or rather is not confined exclusively either with federal or the state government, is not confined exclusively either with the federal government or with the state governments. Meaning, who can change the division of power? See, we have already listed down. See, in our, I have already shown the union list, we have 99 items, state list 61 items, concurrent list 52 items. Now, who can change it? This power to change, the power to amend the constitution is not exclusively with one side. It is not exclusively with the center or not exclusively with the states. Should be a joint exercise. This is to be a joint exercise. Meaning, if you want to change the aspects, or rather the power sharing, if especially those regulating the status and power of the federal and state governments, those areas where the power of the state and the center is to be changed, it has to be decided jointly, or both center and states should participate. See, in India, this is given, it is such a way that the center should pass, the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha should pass it with a specific majority. Then this matter will go to state assembly, legislative assemblies. At least 50% of the states should approve. Then only a change in the power sharing can be made. So, rigidity of the constitution means the rigidity is not about the unamendability. It simply means the power of amending the constitution or the power of changing the power sharing arrangement is not exclusively vested with the federal government or the state government, it is to be joint venture. So, I am just repeating, in India the provision is, if from the concurrent list, if one item is to be changed to state list or union list, it has to be a joint exercise. First, Lok Sabha plus Rajya Sabha should pass with special majority. So, center has done something. Then it will go to the states. 50% of the states, 50% of the state legislative assemblies, 50% of the state legislative assemblies should pass this with simple majority. So, you see, this 50% of the state assemblies will have to pass it with simple majority. So, when both the activities have been done, then this matter will go to the assent of the President, the signing of the President of India. So, you can imagine it is a joint exercise. So, rigidity of the constitution. So, the fourth point is rigidity of the constitution. So, this rigidity is very clearly mentioned in India also. And the fifth is authority of the Supreme Court. Authority of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court will, if there is a dispute between the center and the states arise, if there is a dispute between them, how will you resolve the dispute? This power is given to the Supreme Court. So, Supreme Court of India will decide on the disputes between the center and the states or any dispute between two states. So, there is a clear-cut authority of the court. So, there are 5 essential features in a federal constitution. First of all, a federation has distribution of power, dual government, and it has distribution of power. Number 2, supremacy of the constitution, written constitution, rigidity of the constitution, and the authority of the Supreme Court or authority of the courts. All these 5 essential features are found in India also. Please note, all these features are found in India. Features are found in India. Still, constitution makers or rather independent experts hesitate to call Indian constitution as federal. It is called only quasi-federal. This is because there are certain other features in Indian constitution which violate the federal principle, or there are some certain other features which make the states subordinate to the center in certain circumstances. So, independent experts call Indian constitution quasi-federal because in certain circumstances the states become subordinate to the center. That is what violates the federal principle. I will talk about that separately, where all this federal principle is violated. So, the first the topic in the features, the constitution and the features, I would like to talk about. This is about constitution and the features. I am talking about the nature of the Indian constitution. So, nature of the Indian constitution is federal. That is what the constitution makers say, even though the independent experts call it as quasi-federal, but generally we can, and what is federation and what is the federal principle, what are the essential features of the federal principle, I have covered in this video. So, that is about federation and its essential features.